Welcome to the Breaking Up with Naive podcast, where it's not heartbreak, it's a rebrand. I'm your host, Dr. Becky Rollerson. This is a place where my friends and I share our stories of heartbreak in life, combined with our testimonies of how being a Christ follower led us to surviving the heartbreak and to rebuilding healthy lives. While the stories shared here are relevant and true, it is important to note that I am not a trained counselor, not a trained mental health counselor, nor someone who assesses mental health. If you feel that you need help in that area, I encourage you to please seek medical guidance. The testimonies shared here on this podcast are intended to encourage and inspire other women to be less naive when it comes to Satan's ugly ways. With that, welcome to today's episode of Breaking Up with Naive. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Breaking Up with Naive. It's not heartbreak, it's a rebrand. So I am pretty excited about today's topic, and I have been for a while because I have a good friend that's sitting in front of me that is our guest for today. But today's episode is all about finances. And while you can find a lot of podcasts that talk about a lot of things financial, there are definitely some nuances when it comes to being a single woman and dealing with finances, but also being a woman in a marriage or in a relationship and working through financial things that can be very heartbreaking. And I have my own story of heartbreak when it comes to financial things, especially over the last decade. And I'm going to be pretty transparent on this episode and share some of that. But I do want to go ahead and introduce today's guest because back before I really hit things hard financially, I actually met with today's guest and spent a little time with her discussing through some things, and I'm looking forward to working with her again here in the near future. So let me introduce to you today Tryssa Pacciulli.
That's right. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, I'm so excited that you're here. And I'm just going to ask you to start out by sharing a little bit about yourself, your business, the company that you represent, and a little bit about your background and what you do today for work.
Sure. Sounds good. Well, I was born in Brazil, actually, in the Amazon of all places. So my husband always jokes that I'm like a real life Amazon woman.
That's pretty fun. That's fun. Not everybody can say that.
Yeah. And so we came here to the States when I was 3 years old. We moved to Miami. And so just being like a child of an immigrant family, they had to deal with a lot of setbacks financially. And so my parents worked 2 to 3 jobs in order to make ends meet growing up. And so while they were doing that, they were really trying to give us the American dream. But in the midst of doing that and just trying to give us like the very best of everything, they got into a lot of debt. And they didn't really have access to a lot of like financial planning or anything like that because they didn't meet a lot of the minimums that unfortunately are needed for a lot of wealth management firms. And so they got into a lot of debt, and ultimately they had to declare bankruptcy when I was around like high school, college age. And so when I was looking for what I wanted to do for a living, I just wanted to be able to learn about how to handle money, one, just for my own self, but also because I wanted to be able to help other people, because I saw the heartbreak that my parents went through, not only with their finances, but ultimately it led to them losing our childhood home and also their divorce. So they ultimately ended up getting a divorce. There was just a lot there. It was a very difficult time. And so we experienced a lot of heartbreak in our household, and I just wanted to learn God's ways of biblical like financial management so that I could help others.
I love that. And I think there's some parallels in our story that I'll share in a minute. So tell me who you work for today and a little bit about the values-based financial management business.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have my own practice called Your Financial Legacy. We're a values-based financial planning practice, but we have a compliance back office through a registered investment advisory firm called Inspire Advisors. And they offer the biblically responsible investing that we can offer to clients as well. And ultimately, what it does is that we can screen clients' portfolios and see if what they're investing in goes against their values. So it's something that a lot of people just don't even think about. that when you're buying a stock or when you're purchasing a mutual fund or an ETF in your 401k or in your IRA, you're actually funding companies, right? So you're funding these companies that are publicly held. And so through your dollars, you're helping their business to grow. And as they profit, you benefit off of those profits. But if you're directly benefiting something that may go against your values, it's just worth the conversation.
Right.
And a lot of times people just have no idea what they're even investing in. And so we offer a free screen software where we can just look at a statement of what you currently have, and we can screen it and we can show you, hey, these are the different things that you're like supporting and that you're funding, that you're profiting. Are you okay with all of these? Or do you want us like to look at maybe changing the portfolio a bit to align more with your values?
I love that, Tryssa, because not everybody offers that. And honestly, for those of us who are a little more naive in the financial arena, we wouldn't even know to ask for that.
And honestly, I didn't even know about it until just about 5 or 6 years ago, and it was during COVID. So I had been in the industry for 15 years, and I had worked like for wonderful firms before, Fortune 500 companies, and it was never something that was brought up. And a lot of financial advisors don't even know that this exists. And so when I found Inspire Advisors and I saw that they were like one of the world leaders in this biblically responsible investing and in screen portfolios, God really convicted me. And so it was like, all right, Tryssa, now that you know about this, right? So now that your eyes have seen,
right?
Now what are you going to do? Are you just going to ignore it and just keep investing the money like the way that you've been investing? Or are you actually going to change? And that was really hard for me because I knew in my heart what I needed to do, but financially, it also meant stepping away from a really good salary at the prior company that I worked for. And it was scary, especially during COVID, like to step away. But the conviction was so strong that after 6 months of me just wrestling with the Lord, and I'm like, Lord, I give my whole life to you. I serve in all of these different capacities at church. I lead on these different boards. But my career, this is the way that investing's been, so for generations. I can't change this now and impose this on my previous firm.
Yeah.
But the conviction was so strong that ultimately I said, you know what, Lord, I just want to be in your will and I don't want to feel this anymore. Mm-hmm. And so even if I have to live in a shack or something, I just want to follow your lead and I will start this practice under Inspire Advisors as our registered investment advisory firm. And I'm just going to trust you. And it's been a blessing since. We've grown so much, and the Lord has just been so faithful and has shown us that there's a lot of people out there who want to learn about this stuff.
Absolutely. And that testimony is so strong. Mm. And again, I think we have a lot of parallels.
Yeah.
And so I'll share a little bit of my story, and I think you will see the parallels here, and then we can really talk about steps forward and some of your services that you could offer, as well as what that means for advising women of all different situations. So I first met Tryssa because she's really good friends with my friend Melissa, who's my friend and guest from episode 1. Mm-hmm. And so she knew you. And she knew your husband from their careers.
They used to work together.
Yeah, they used to work together. And so I found myself in a position, as I have been transparent on previous episodes of this podcast, I was divorced in 2015. And up until my divorce, I had a part-time position, professional position, but part-time. And then I also served as an elected official in my small community, which was some salary. Mm-hmm. But I found myself in a position where I had to live off of a single income, and I had $0 saved. Mm-hmm. And when I divorced, I inherited debt. There were no assets to split. Everything that was split was who was taking what debt. Mm-hmm. So that's how I started my life as a divorced woman. And then I also found myself in a position where I was putting groceries on a credit card because I was having to pay an entire monthly rent and utility bills on my own, as well as my half of all the kids' expenses. And I will say this, the Lord blessed me with their father who was willing to pay for half of their expenses. So there's a lot of women who don't have that fortunate circumstance either. But I was able to have somebody who split expenses with me, but there were a lot of expenses, 2 kids, and they're trying to do activities and do things. And to a certain extent, there's so much embarrassment when you don't have money to cover things that you will sometimes do whatever it takes to keep up with the Joneses, for lack of a better way of saying it. So you're providing things for them that all of the other kids have, but you're going further and further and further into debt to do that. And so that's the position that I found myself in. And not only that, but with my elected official position, there is an expectation for the people in those positions to donate to various community athletic events and to community events. And so when I didn't have money for groceries, but I had to write $100 check to whatever organization to support in some way, shape, or form. And then how did I pay for those groceries? It was a credit card. So fast forward, I found myself in this position where I was very upside down. I came to see you. You gave me some great advice. And one of the things you said is, well, we want to figure out how for you to not have to file bankruptcy, because that would be way more devastating than other things. And that weighed really heavy on me. And I ended up, though, I tried to settle with credit card companies, and I didn't even have the cash flow to do that. So before I finish the rest of my story, just give me a little bit of background on what that means to settle with a credit card company and what that process would look like, and kind of what resources you would have to make that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you have debt with a credit card company, you have the ability to settle for a lesser amount, right? So sometimes it's 50 cents on the dollar, 60 cents on the dollar. It really just depends. The problem is that you have to have the money, right? Like to settle. So if not, then they're just going to put you on these long payment plans. The problem with the payment plans a lot of the time is that if there's not excess income, like to make large payments or like substantial payments, then like sometimes you're not even paying the interest, And so now it just keeps growing in this snowball. And so settling the debt is helpful when you have some money to be able to settle it with. So a lot of times we see folks just like try to save up a little bit and then call these companies, and then let's just say someone owes like $5,000. They're like, hey, I've got it's $3,000. Like, can we settle on this? And so sometimes you have to like push it a little bit and be persistent. There's a lot of different letters that you can find online. Dave Ramsey also has a bunch of resources on different letters that you can send these companies, because you always want to get it in writing. Also is another thing. But then once they do agree to an amount, then you want to make sure to pay that up, and then it will come off of your credit score eventually. But I do recommend that if people are just like so overwhelmed and don't even know where to start, I would start with just pulling up your credit report. Right? It's not your credit score, but your credit report. Because that's pages and pages long, and it shows you every single outstanding debt that you have, what the balance is, what number you can even call, and it also shows whether you're behind or not. But that's where I would start.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. And again, you shared a lot of this with me back in, I think, 2018, whenever I really hit this hard. And then, but what it boiled down to is I did not have that cash flow to even have enough to settle. And then even looking at anything I did have to sell was pennies compared to what I was going to need to be able to settle. So ultimately, unfortunately, I did end up filing bankruptcy. And I'll say this too, I was so embarrassed. So embarrassed. And one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is it is court records, right? When you file bankruptcy. So it is publicly available information. So my name was actually published in the local newspaper. Now, most people probably didn't see it. Some may have. And it was under my formal name, which some people don't recognize me by. But in my mind, I just was so embarrassed, And so I did not want local people to know what I was going through. Now, Melissa knew everything because I shared a lot of information with her, and she knew a lot of my daily struggles with it. Like when I was negative 17 if this check went through. And that was on Tuesday, and I didn't get paid till Friday, and trying to figure out how to do things. So I did end up filing bankruptcy. And you know more about this than me, but it was the type where I literally had to pay all the debt back. So when they looked at my income, unfortunately, even though I was able to list expenses out and things like that, I mean, when you owe a creditor money, they're going to get as much back out of that as they can.
Yeah, and that's something that a lot of people just don't even realize. So they think that when you declare bankruptcy, it all just like magically goes away, and it all, it usually doesn't. Like, it all depends. And so I appreciate you sharing that journey, because that can definitely help to someone else.
Right. And so Chapter 13 was the type that I filed, where basically I was given a payment plan, and then
like a reorganization, they call it. Yeah.
Right.
Reorganization.
Reorganization, yes. And so that's where they reorganized my debts in a way, and then they figured out a dollar amount based off of my needed expenses.
Which they determine. And
all of those donations to civic organizations and other things that were expected of me as an elected official, they did not include those things. Those were the things that they deemed were not necessary for me. But they were necessary for me and my community.
Which is really hard, yeah.
So whenever I was given that dollar amount of what I was going to be spending, and they make that, when I say spending, I mean paying back, over a 5-year period, it came to almost $800 a month.
Wow.
Which is a very, very expensive car payment, or not that much less than my house payment.
Yeah.
And it scared me, because the other thing that happens is you can no longer have a credit card. You basically have zero credit availability.
Your ability to borrow money.
Right.
And so now you really have to live off of what you make.
That's
so
exactly right.
Forces you to live off of less than what you make.
Exactly. So it forces you to live off what you make. Not necessarily a bad lesson for anybody, but
just
a very hard one when you are a single income and you have 2 children who are active in various things and that you're trying to take care of. And also a challenge in a world where financial transactions became more and more common to be put on a credit card or to be electronic payments. And when all you have is a checking account, and thank goodness that checking accounts these days come with debit cards, because there was a day when that didn't exist, right? So my debit card became the only way that I could make any online transaction. I think my debit card probably got hacked 10 times during this 5 years.
Yeah.
And it wasn't because of my bank or security measures. It's just that there's going to be theft in the financial industry. So there were things that were happening, and every once in a while, either for my full-time employment or for something else, somebody would say, can we just put that on a credit card and we'll pay you back? And I embarrassingly would have to say, I'm sorry, do you have a credit card? I don't have a credit card that I can put that on.
Yeah.
And so it's easy to say, I don't believe in credit cards, so I don't have a credit card. But at the end of the day, that wasn't the issue.
Sure.
So it was kind of the way that I would respond to cover up the embarrassment of not being able to do a financial transaction. So it made traveling very hard. I'll never forget going to rent a car, a personal vehicle. And I knew that I was going to need a card, which I thought, okay, I've got my debit card, not a problem. I actually had to pay. I had the money to pay cash for the rental car. Yeah. They would not let me rent the car because I didn't have a credit card. A debit card was not acceptable. It had to be an actual credit card. So there's just certain things that no matter what you think you can do and you think you finally have it under control, and then I walk into a rental car place and they tell me, no, you can't rent the car, and it completely changed all my travel plans.
Wow.
And it was emotionally devastating for me. It was heartbreak because I couldn't provide what I had promised I would provide.
That's really hard. I know that with some places, like if you just say, just run it as credit, so they won't even really know. But and then a lot of places, if it is debit and they do allow it, they will require a much larger deposit. Like at hotels or something, so they'll require you to put a much larger deposit initially, which they will ultimately, as a refund after you check out and all that. But still, you have to have that much money in your bank account to be able to cover this deposit that you're not actually spending, but you just have to have it on file.
Right. And so it still comes out of your account and becomes non-usable. That happened to me too.
For a while.
Where I had to check into a hotel for something that my kids were involved with. Mm-hmm. And they put that hold on there. And it took all of our money that I had planned to use to eat off of for the week out. So and I had nowhere else to fund that. So stressful, heartbreak, worry. I mean, you name it. It was just weighing heavy. And so many times I said, oh, this is why Tryssa said, don't file bankruptcy, because it leaves you in these heartbreaking situations over and over again. So the other thing is that during that time, I did receive a few tax returns, but my tax return money, my refunds had to be surrendered immediately to the trustee, because that is also part of the bankruptcy process. Yeah. So, which is fine. It pays off that account faster and gets you to the closure of your bankruptcy case faster, but it also takes away any extra that you may have been able to use for things.
Sure. It is a lot of heartbreak. And as a child of parents who went through this, I saw that. But at the same time, I can say now, so years after my parents filed, that there is light at the end of the tunnel and that there is hope. And so that's my desire here also, is just to give anyone who's listening who might be struggling, is just to give them that hope that, so regardless of whether you have to declare bankruptcy or not, but if you just feel like your situation has no hope, there is always hope and there is always light at the end of the tunnel. And so now, so just kind of sharing their success story, like my mom, so when they got divorced, she moved up here just to get away from our town back home.
Sure.
And so she moved here because I had moved here for college and I'd gotten married, then had kids here in Gainesville. And so she's a preschool teacher. So it's not like she makes a lot of money, but we sat down and then she said, now that I'm just one income, right? I don't have your dad's financial support. It's all me. And it's a big responsibility. So what can I do to be able to to eventually retire in 10 years? So she's already in her 50s.
Yeah.
And we looked at what her needs were, right? So what do you need to have each month to survive and as a retirement? Just give me your best guess. And then based off of her needs, we looked at what lump sum she would need to have whereabouts at her retirement age. And then we looked at what her Social Security was expected to be. And so we said, okay, well, here are your needs. Let's subtract the Social Security amount from that, because that's income that's going to be coming in. And then whatever's left is the monthly income that we have to solve for, right, out of your own assets. And so then what does that lump sum need to be to spin off that monthly income that you need to carry you in retirement through the rest of your life? And so once we did that, we said, okay, well, now that we have that lump sum, now we have to do the math on what we have to contribute each month or each year now
to make that happen.
Exactly, to get you to that lump sum. And so when we did that, it was impossible with the preschool salary, right? But that's her passion. That's what she loves. And so the last thing I wanted to do was to take that away from her.
Absolutely.
So ultimately what she ended up doing was she said, well, I want to pick up a second job.
Okay.
And so she loves driving. It's therapeutic for her. And she loves to listen to her Christian music and her praise and worship. And so she gave Uber a shot. And she makes a considerable amount of money on Uber each year. And it has allowed her to be able to save and invest that difference that she needed in order to get to her goal. And now she's just a few years away from it. So it's just super exciting to see. And whenever someone tells me, oh, it's impossible for me, or I'm too old, or whatever, I always share her story of hope, because she was already up there in age. And it's not like she had a big income or a big a shovel to really use to save. But we were able to find a plan that worked for her. And it also just gave her a lot of that dignity back.
Yes. Getting the dignity back has been significant. And I just love the story, and I'm very inspired by your mom's testimony and your testimony being a part of that planning process. And I know I can say that my case finally closed.
Awesome.
Finally got that behind me. And just that alone was significant. Just, I can't even tell you the burden that it lifted off my shoulders.
Yeah, there you go.
Yes, it was like, finally, I am getting a little bit of freedom back. And I also loved that you brought in hope, because both Candy, my friend that passed away, as well as Melissa, those two probably knew the most about my situation during that 5 years of dealing with that. And both of them would consistently give me verbal hope, supportive hope. And truthfully, every once in a while, I would randomly get some small monetary gift from one of them or the other. And a lot of times it's just because they knew and they were able to contribute to that. So once I got past that, and the case was closed, and I was able to start rebuilding my credit, I've done quite a few things to rebuild my credit since then. But maybe talk a little bit about the rebuilding the credit process.
Yeah.
And maybe if that's significant or why that's significant, because I know you all really look a lot at Dave Ramsey's baby steps.
Yeah.
Which obviously there's some consideration for not needing credit in some of that curriculum. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So as far as just rebuilding credit, we do live in a society that does look at your credit score, right? So that is a part of our everyday life.
Even for auto insurance.
Yeah. Really, like for a lot of things. I've even heard that some jobs look at your credit score. So it is important overall. But a lot of it is just, if you build a life where you don't need to borrow money anymore, then it's not necessary.
Yes.
So a lot of those so teachings are, well, let's get to a place like where you don't have to borrow anymore. And so with mortgages, like Dave talks a lot about the manual underwriting, where you kind of show your assets as opposed to a credit score. Those can sometimes be hard to find, but they're out there. So if so someone didn't have the credit score, they could do the manual underwriting, but it's a lot harder to find than it is with a traditional mortgage. So with the building up of the credit score, so things like keeping your balances at less than maybe 20 to 30% of what the actual credit line is.
Okay.
Because the closer you get to your credit line, then like the more that it impacts your credit score in a negative way. Also, of course, making the payments. I mean, ideally, if you can just pay off the entire balance every single month, that's ideal, because it shows the lender that you have the ability like to pay off your debt like consistently.
Right. And to not let the debt build again.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, exactly. Something else that we've seen, like for people who don't have a lot of the maybe traditional things that would be reported on a credit score, is also self-reporting. So for things like maybe rent, right? So sometimes like your rent is not reported to the credit bureau, and we're like, man, like I really want to get credit, so for those rent payments, like I want that to affect my credit score in a positive way. And so you can actually look into self-reporting. There's a website actually called Self that allows you to do it.
Okay.
And so with that, there's a system there, but they will have the landlord report all of your payments, and it goes straight to the credit bureau.
That's
so that
great
you
advice.
do get credit for it. Yeah, even things like your cell phone bill, your utility bill, those are all options that are available with the self-reporting that you wouldn't traditionally get credit for, like for someone who's really trying to increase their credit report,
right,
but doesn't want to necessarily do it by borrowing more money.
Yes,
right? You don't have to borrow money
sense.
like to have rent and like to have your utility bills. So that's an option as well. But ultimately, so with the Dave Ramsey baby steps, we've got the 7 baby steps. The first one is to save $1,000 in an emergency fund.
Okay.
So ideally, if someone's just getting started, we'd say maybe start off with $500 as the goal, and it's just looking at your budget, at your monthly expenses. There's a couple of different apps that you can use as well. I love the online budgeting. Back in the day, like I used to do the spreadsheets and all that kind of stuff. The reality is that life happens.
Yes.
And what's on a spreadsheet or what's written down is not exact with what actually happens.
It actually may shift a little bit
Yeah,
depending
exactly.
on what may happen in life, right?
Exactly. And so I like the real live budgets. There's different apps that you could use. There's Rocket Money, there's Every Dollar, there's Monarch Money. Those are 3 great apps. But it links all of your accounts together, so your credit cards, your debit cards, and it'll actually show you what your historical spending has been. So it goes back, which is kind of scary initially when people first get the app and they're
Sure.
like, oh my gosh, that's what I've been spending. But it's okay.
Like, oops.
Yeah, exactly. But we got to just start off somewhere. And then what we can do is that we can create a budget. So here is my goal, right? I want to spend X on eating out each month. I want to spend X on groceries, because those are two very different categories in my book.
Yes.
It's not all just food. Like, it's two very
It
separate
is.
categories. And then you can make rules so that the transactions automatically go to those categories. So, for example, you can say, so when I go to Publix, that counts as a grocery.
Okay.
So when I go to, I don't know, like Yamato, that counts as eating out or
Eating
something.
out.
And so you make those rules. And so on the app, let's just say that someone said, this is $500 is like the eating out goal. They can look at their app maybe like midway through the month and see where they're at. And if it's the 15th of the month and they've already spent $400 of the $500 budget to eat out, then it's just a way to alert them so that they can change their behaviors.
Yes.
Right? So like for me, when I see that, it automatically tells me, okay, let's defrost the chicken. Let's defrost whatever is in my deep freezer so that I can make sure that it's ready and accessible when I get home.
So that you're not going to last minute go
Yes,
out
so
and
no
get something out
impulsive
to eat.
Shopping. Yes. Because a lot of times we're so busy, life is so fast paced nowadays that most people just don't even know what they spend. Right. So sometimes we have those conversations like, what do you spend each month? I don't know. I have no idea. I don't even know what I make. That's very common. So with these budgeting apps, it'll automatically show you exactly what you make each month, what that spending pattern has been, and then we can start to implement some behavioral changes based off the numbers.
Yes. I think those are really good points. And I think about, I've come a long ways. I'm on baby step number 2.
Yeah.
And the only debts that I have are 2 vehicles, one for me and one for my daughter that I'm making payments on, and I'm getting ready to double up on that. But I think it's also important to note that perfection in these plans also sometimes can bring you heartbreak if you expect, you can set goals.
Right.
And go for them, but you can also upset yourself really quick. And I'll give you a quick example.
Yeah.
So just recently, there's a big concert coming to town, and I know I had a few nieces that wanted to go, and truthfully, I wanted to go, and the tickets ended up costing way more than I was thinking that they would probably cost. I don't know why I didn't think they would be more, but long story short, I made a very impulsive decision, but I also did not know. I had not planned for that because literally found out about the concert opportunity and tickets went on sale just a few days later.
Sure.
So there was no real time to save or plan. Sure. And so that would be an example of where I went, like I didn't really plan to spend that money, and then may have had some buyer's remorse in the few hours after that because I thought, I'm usually so much better about that. I'm not so impulsive. But I also had to give myself some grace and realize that it will be okay. It wasn't way out of the league of my budget. It just means that now there are some other things in the next couple months that I won't be doing.
Right.
Because I chose this, so I'm not going to be saying yes to this invite or doing that.
Right. And it's all just a give and take. A lot of times in like budgets, we recommend having like a miscellaneous category or something so that you can kind of count on.
Sure.
And even if it's not spent, that could always go into what we call a sinking fund, which is where it's like, hey, I'm saving for a future trip, or I'm saving for this. Like my brother, he's huge into soccer. So actually was just talking to him earlier about a World Cup sinking fund, right? Because soccer's been his life. And so he's like, when the World Cup happens next summer, then I am going to go to games and I'm going to travel.
He's going, right.
Exactly. So then what can I do now to prepare for it? But we don't always have that opportunity to prepare in advance. So those sinking funds are always helpful. And so that's really maybe step number 2, as like you mentioned, is the paying off debt.
Right.
And that's the one where people are actually in the longest.
Right.
Because that's the one.
And that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Because, all the other debts are paid off except for the 2 vehicles. And, of course, they're going to require a little longer.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're newer, but I'm taking the one that is financed at the highest interest.
Yeah.
And the longest.
Sure.
As far as number of months financed. And so that's the one I'm focused on first.
Sure.
It's just still so much better than where I was at a few years ago.
Yeah.
And I'm just so thankful. And so having said that, there's one other area that I had felt very convicted about. So now we're going to go back to the biblical financial wisdom for a second. But I had always felt convicted because during that time of bankruptcy, I did not tithe. I literally did not know how I was going to. And I said, now, the Lord doesn't work like this because you don't make deals with the Lord. He's in charge. But even still, it didn't keep me from saying, Lord, if you will just see me out of this, if you will just help me from day to day and make sure that my people are taken care of and help me out of this, I promise you that when I'm on the other side of this, I will give you my 10%, just like the Bible requests that we do. And there's a lot of people out there who may say, why 10%? And there's some biblical wisdom in that. And there's several sermons that the church that I attend, the pastor, has preached on that. But I wanted to be able to give my 10%. And I am so just thankful that today I can give my 10%. Amen. And for me, that's not paying God back.
Right.
That is literally saying, I trust you with my money.
Yeah.
You have blessed me.
Yeah.
And I trust you with my money.
Yeah. So on the budgeting app,
yes,
that's one of the areas as well that we put right at the very, very top. And I don't know about your church, but with my church back during COVID, they switched from like the actual
collection plate.
Yes, the collection plate. Now just to like electronic giving.
Yeah, we have online giving.
Yep. And so like mine's just like on the automated one. Now, the issue with the automated one is that you don't necessarily see it and feel it as much.
That's true.
And so with the budgeting, since I look at that all the time, I titled that like 10% tithe. I think that the Monarch Money will just put it as like a charity. But I changed the nickname to Reminder That It's All His.
Yes, exactly.
And so that really helps me to intentionally remember that it's all His. And whatever percentage, if it's 10 or if it's more, whatever like the Lord is leading, that it's all His. And it still allows me to be intentional about it versus just kind of being blind about it.
Right. Yes. And that's definitely a component of what my thought process was during that, was just that it is all His. And if I really trust Him to take care of my needs, then this is not a problem for me. Yeah. This is not a big deal. And then additionally, in addition to that, while I'm obviously in baby step number 2 and still working on those last few debts, I also have a family member who found herself in quite the situation that's honestly, some would consider it worse than what I was in, which I thought I was in it very low at the bottom of a valley, but I think her valley's lower than mine. I kind of see it that way. And to make a long story short, there's one particular communication bill that the Lord just said, cover this for her. And I have been blessed with a great employer and employers. And so I said, I'm going to cover this for her. And I told her, and of course, at first she resisted, but I was like, no, you don't understand. Like, I have seen the worst of where it is. And I had great friends that blessed me a few times when I was really at the bottom and needed it. And so here's my opportunity to bless somebody else. So where does that kind of giving and charitable giving fit into good financial strategy?
Yeah. So I definitely think that it's important to follow the Lord's prompting. Like as far as when it comes to the financial planning of it, just like planning ahead. One thing that we like to do is just to have a benevolence fund.
Okay.
And so that's another component of the budget. Now, the way that we personally do it is that as far as like our, so regular budget, we've got the breakdown of what percentage goes to what. And then we have a benevolence area as well that's budgeted in. Now, back in the day, we would only do it if we got any like commissions or anything that was above our regular expenses because it was pretty tight. And so anything that my husband may have made, like overtime work or that I made, that would go into this extra category. And then we would split that into different components.
Okay.
So maybe a certain like percentage of that extra income went towards the benevolence fund.
Okay.
Now, I love having different nicknames to different sinking funds. So at my bank, then I could have different savings accounts and I nicknamed them different things. So one of them was just benevolence. One of them is the 3 to 6 months of emergency fund, which is baby step number 3.
Right.
And so whenever I felt like the Lord was prompting me to give, I would look at the benevolence fund.
Okay.
And I would give out of that benevolence fund. Now, sometimes you might feel like giving above that benevolence fund, and that's okay. Financially speaking, I would just take it out of another category. So it's, Lord, I feel like you're asking me to give more than this benevolence fund has. And so I've looked at my monthly budget and I'm choosing to eat out less so that I can give, right?
Right.
Versus just going into more debt, because the borrower is a slave to the lender. And so we also want to keep that part in mind. But if it's something that we can quickly replenish, then that's okay.
Okay. No, that's great advice. And you can tell that I need to meet with you sometime soon and kind of readdress. I just feel like I'm in such a better position now.
Absolutely.
That I am in a position where I can actually do some things that I couldn't do before. And of course, my children are grown.
Yeah.
And so
It's a different season of life.
It is a different season of life. It really
I think
is.
that it's important also, like, just to take advantage of the employer plans.
Yes.
A lot of people like have these great employer plans offered, and they just aren't aware of how it works.
Right.
And so just spending some time during open enrollment or with an advisor, like to say, hey, this is where I work. These are the benefits offered. So which one of these should I take advantage of? But a match, like a 401k match, is definitely something that you don't want to miss out on, because that's just free money.
Yeah.
So even if you can't do
you don't want to
above the match-
accidentally not realize what that is.
Exactly. So even if you can't do above the match, then I would highly encourage that people just kind of tweak their budget so that they can at least do the match. Like sometimes it's a 3% match or like a 4% match. So just something to consider is just, if you're not currently saving or investing in your retirement accounts, look at your employer as a place like to start off with, because a lot of times they do have a plan offered. And if they don't, maybe you can ask them like, hey, can we start a 401k?
Sure. So one of the things that I have noticed, and this is with some family members of mine, some other situations, is life insurance. And I haven't even mentioned this part of the story, but I also grew up in a home that experienced bankruptcy. And I'm so fortunate that my parents, they did end up staying together, although it was really rough during some of those years. And I had actually just moved out when a lot of that transpired. So my two sisters got that probably worse than me. Although I will say, as a result, I had very little financial support from them. As a college student, I had to pay most of my expenses on my own. And thus, that led me to taking out lots of student loans, which also became part of that debt that entered into marriage with me and carried with me through most of the marriage, and honestly carried with me through the divorce. It was still there by the time we divorced. So that student loan debt. And I always tell my kids, you're not taking out student loans. And I've been so fortunate. I mean, one is already working and the other one is working several jobs, but also took a route that has allowed her tuition to be covered. And so far, neither one of my kids have started life in that kind of debt, which I think is important.
That's huge.
But the point I'm getting to here is that my dad did pass away in 2019. And fortunately, he did have a fairly decent life insurance policy. And while my mom would get my dad back at any point if she could, obviously life doesn't work that way. Life and death doesn't. But she is probably in the best financial situation of her entire life because my dad did invest in some life insurance through his work. So just some overall general thoughts about life insurance.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I highly recommend that everybody have life insurance. So Dave Ramsey just kind of uses like a basic principle of 10 to 12 times your income. It all depends on the individual person, and I would say on their debt as well, but definitely enough to be able to cover any debts that your loved ones would be left with. But the term life insurance is so inexpensive. You can just hop online and just find like a 20-year term policy or a 30-year term policy.
Sure.
And it covers you for that period of time. The premise behind that is you buy a term and you invest the difference. And so during that 30 years that it's covering, then the goal is that you're investing into your 401k or into an IRA. And so by the time that insurance period is done, if you have not passed away in that period, then now the policy is gone, but your assets now are at that point where you're what we call self-insured. And so that if anything happens to you, then your loved ones are covered. Right?
Because there are enough assets to be able to liquidate to make up that difference.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
So just some financial planning would help kind
Sure.
of determine like what that amount is. There's also a permanent life insurance, which does cost a lot more money than the term policy. It's got a cash value built into it. But it's also important to look at your budget and see what you can afford. A lot of the permanent or like the whole life policies, the returns on the cash value part aren't necessarily as
lucrative or
well, yeah. And so it's just making sure that you evaluate the two options, but having a death benefit that covers your family's needs is what's most important.
Okay.
And
that
so
makes
oftentimes
sense.
when people are on a tight budget and the permanent life insurance policy costs a lot more than the term policy, so they might get talked into getting permanent insurance policy, but the death benefit is a lot lower because that's all that they can afford.
Okay.
Well, now it's not giving the death benefit that your family actually needs, right?
That makes sense.
To cover your actual income being lost. So I always recommend starting with the term policy. That's the most affordable one out there. And that as long as you cover your family for that period of time, so while your kids are young, while they still depend on your income, then after that, then you could be self-insured once that policy runs out. Okay. So like my husband and I, we got a 30-year term policy. And of course, and by the end of the 30 years, and the goal is that we're self-insured. But at that point, the kids are also gone out of the house, so they're finished with college,
right.
The mortgage is paid off, so the responsibilities are a lot less in that situation.
That does make sense. So interestingly enough, at one point early in my marriage, I did purchase a permanent life insurance policy. And so when I found myself single and the real estate market around 2016, 2017 wasn't too bad during that time. And I ended up wanting to buy a house, but I didn't have money for a down payment. And I came to the realization that I could cash in on that permanent life insurance policy and close it essentially, and then use that money, although I could have been taxed on it, right? But use that money to invest in my down payment, my house. And ultimately, that's the decision I made. Now, this was before the bankruptcy took place. Literally, the bankruptcy came just a few years later. But in retrospect, although my insurance agent wasn't extremely happy with me at that point, I ended up finding that to be a big blessing in retrospect. Now, I'm not saying I would advise people to do it. I'm sure you probably wouldn't either. But finding myself in that situation, that's what worked for me in that moment.
That was a cash value that you could access. Yeah, I mean, you're either able to borrow on that cash value, or of course, you can just take out the full distribution. But then you would also have to look for another policy later on.
And so I do have other policies today, several through employers, but also an independent one as well.
Yes, and that's important.
With child riders.
The employer ones are great. Awesome. The employer ones are great, and usually it comes at a group discount. The issue with the employer ones are sometimes you can't take it with you. So when you leave that employer, either when you retire or if you were just to switch jobs or heaven forbid lose your job, now it's a difficult financial position, and now you've also lost your life insurance as well. And so when you get an independent policy with an independent agency, then you're able to keep that policy regardless of where you work.
Okay, good information. And so one of the other things, and I know I just said child rider, but just to make sure that it's just enough to honestly cover funeral expenses. And as hard as that is to even speak about, I also know that that is the real world because I have seen friends lose children. So that also is an important question to ask if you have children.
Yeah, some even have, I've even seen term policies that have a long-term care rider or chronic illness rider, where if anything happened to you and you don't have long-term care insurance, which is super expensive, you can then take some of the death benefit and then you could use it as a long-term care expense. So those are all available options. We don't do the insurance here, but I definitely so recommend looking for an independent insurance agency who's able to quote you on different companies, right? Because then they can price shop for you, just go over the different features and different benefits of each one, and then just find one that works for you. And estate planning is also huge. So that's a whole nother aspect of it, which I want to say that close to 70% of people don't have a will.
Yeah, I heard that. I heard that. So it's interesting because my employer has a legal benefit, which I didn't even know existed until another coworker mentioned it to me about 2 years ago. Yeah. So it's so low cost. Yeah. It's like $10 a month for this legal benefit. And so I decided to do that and was able to get a will, a Lady Bird estate deed on my house.
That's awesome.
I had a living will. I did all of the legal documents because again, as a single woman, there's not going to be a spouse making those decisions.
Right. And you don't want the state to have to divide it.
Right. I have 2 children that I'm thinking I need to make this. And I have also watched this happen with people whose parents have passed away and they've been left in this really struggle with no will and things going to probate. And those things happen. There's a process, but if I can make it easier on my children. And again, a few years ago, I was not in a position to do any of this. So the Lord has really blessed me by making me less naive to the heartbreak of financial things by being better about planning ahead of time. So I do have all of those legal documents in place.
That's awesome.
As far as I know.
Yeah. And that's awesome.
Per the attorney that I was using through my legal benefit at work. But I just feel so much better and more secure. And I even got my act together with regards to important financial accounts and passwords and made sure that both of my children as well as my sisters, because they may end up advising my children, even though they're adults and they're grown now, they're still young. So to have somebody to advise them and to help them access things and be prepared to, because I also watched my mom go through that when my dad passed away and all that she had to deal with.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot. And I mean, probate's not cheap either. So there's a cost to that. There's a lot of heartbreak because it takes so long sometimes. So having everything documented just helps with that process.
And grieving the loved one that you just lost on top of all of the business things.
Sure.
Just adds another component.
So I just highly recommend that anyone who's looking to get with an estate attorney to be able just to talk through their situation. Some people need a trust. Some people don't need a trust. And so the attorney can really walk you through all of that. And then just one thing that I wanted to mention for anyone who either is divorced or has had a spouse who passed away, when it comes to retirement, Social Security is another aspect as well that you want to keep in mind.
Okay.
That if you were married for 10 years or more, then you could possibly collect spousal benefits on an ex-spouse. And as long as you haven't remarried, then you have the ability to collect up to 50% of their Social Security. Now, that does not impact them at all, so they still get 100% of theirs.
Okay.
But if your benefit on your own income is less than 50% of theirs, then it's worth applying for. Okay. So, for example, just for easy math, if an ex-husband's Social Security was $3,000 a month, and let's just say that someone's was $1,000 a month, okay, then the spousal benefit would be $1,500, right? Because that's 50% of his $3,000. So in that case, the spousal benefit of the $1,500 is more than the $1,000.
Okay.
So in that case, then you can apply for the spousal benefit online on the Social Security Administration website, and it's super simple, and they can go ahead and process it. And I've even seen.
Is this even if the ex-spouse is remarried?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So you're just the one who can't remarry.
Okay.
And then it has to be at least 10-year marriage.
Okay.
So you can actually do it with multiple people. So let's just say that someone was married to 3 different women and each one of them was for the 10 years, then each one of those women could apply for the spousal benefit, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah.
But it's allowed and it was implemented, right? So back in the early 1900s, they were stay-at-home moms.
Yes.
Right? So they gave up their
They didn't
careers.
have their own incomes.
Exactly. And so since they didn't have their own incomes or maybe just worked a little bit on the side, their benefits alone was super low. And so this was a way to still be able to give them a decent retirement. But then again, Social Security was never meant to be your sole income in retirement. It's really just a supplement.
Right.
Right? So to either a pension or just to your own savings.
And this is not something that has to be written into the divorce agreement. This is like law after the fact.
Absolutely.
So it can still be a potential.
Absolutely. And then these survivor benefits is 100% of that ex-spouse's benefit.
Right. Okay.
So
I did
it's different
know
than the
that.
spousal. So yeah, there's a lot of options out there. Just want everyone to be aware of what's available and that there is light and that there is hope.
Sure. Hope. That's the key word, even on
Absolutely.
financial things. So 2 more things, Tryssa. So I have a lot of friends who maybe are single for whatever reason, whether it be that they are a widow or they are divorced and for whatever reason, and then maybe enter into a relationship with somebody and they don't remarry, but sometimes they begin to split expenses in this relationship. And I'm not going to be the judge and look at this necessarily as this is biblical or non-biblical, but just from a practical standpoint, what general advice do you have for a woman or a man even that finds themselves in a single situation, but maybe splitting expenses with another person?
Yeah. So I think that it's super important for both people to be on the same page financially. There is a thing called like financial infidelity, which is where you don't disclose everything. And so there's a lot of hidden skeletons there in the closet. And I think it's important that before you get into this financial agreement essentially with your partner, that you really have these open conversations and maybe even share credit reports. I don't know, maybe that's just
it does kind of sound crazy,
that's
but
a place
then
to start off.
Yeah.
Like here it all is. And then really just working on, okay, maybe we should take a financial planning or a financial peace university course together. So on the Dave Ramsey website, you can look up financial peace university courses. They have them all over the place. And if you don't find one in your local town, then you could always just find one of them online. There's a lot of online classes as well. We offer them here at our church in Gainesville once a year. And so that's available. And I highly recommend that because it allows both people to have the same mindset
going into the spending
towards finances.
Yes.
Yeah. So finances and faith are the 2 things that you want to be on the same page on specifically, because it can really affect you later on. And then I would also say to not commingle your money in the same account until you get married, and to not purchase, ideally, not to purchase property together until you're married. Because if not, then you have to have different agreements in place to know, okay, then once, or if we do split up, then like contractually.
How does that work?
Right, then who gets what? And it's just messier when you're not married. And so I would just caution against that until you are legally married, because there are different legal protections for a spouse than there is for a non-spouse.
Okay.
But of course, consult with a family law attorney for that. But I would say that just being on the same page financially, being super transparent, and then just work together towards what the cause is. And if you start to notice some red flags of, hey, I am putting everything in here, or I'm doing all the work, and he's not, that's a red flag.
Sure.
So listen to that. So that's what I'd recommend as far as the
Okay. No, again,
goals.
Great advice. And we probably could do a whole podcast series on financial things because there's just so much. But having said that, that's not necessarily the sole focus of this podcast. But I do want to give you an opportunity to share with our listeners what some of the services that you provide through your financial legacy, and just share how that process works and a way to contact you. I know you all have a website.
Yes. So we have a website. It's yourfinanciallegacy.com. So YOUR financiallegacy.com. And on there, it's super transparent. We go over who we are, what our values are, the different services. But we ultimately have 3 services. The first one, which is the most common, is investment management.
Okay.
And so that's where we manage clients' investments. So it's super common if they have an old 401k account that's just kind of like sitting there at their old employer. And a lot of times 401k plans only give you a list of maybe like 15 or like 20 different fund options. And so with the IRAs, you just have a lot more flexibility. You can choose from an entire fund universe. You can have individual stocks, you can have mutual funds, ETFs, CDs, money markets, U.S. treasuries. You just have so many more options with the individual retirement account. So for old 401ks, that's a place that we can always start off with. But also with inheritance, or if you've just come across some money, right? So the lotto, whatever it is. But inheritance this year has been a big one for us.
Okay.
We have had quite a few people come in with just inheritance that they got from a loved one. And actually, we're in the middle of the greatest transfer of wealth ever, because a lot of the baby boomers right? So they're starting to pass away. And so now we're seeing a lot of that wealth be passed on to the next generation. And so there's going to be a lot of that coming. But just the investment management where we can manage the investments for you. So we'd open up an account here for you. We custody with a couple different custodians. One is Charles Schwab. That's our most common. We also use LPL Financial as well, American Funds. We have access to Goldman Sachs. They're just different custodians, and they're the ones who actually hold the money.
Okay.
We don't hold the money. We just manage the money, and we give advice, and we do the trades on your behalf based off of your risk tolerance, so your comfort level with investing, and also based off of your values. So the investment management is the first one. Our fees there range from 1.5% all the way down to 0.5%, depending on the assets that they want us to manage. But the average is around 1%.
Okay.
The second service is the financial planning, which is more of an a la carte project base. That's a 12-month agreement. 6 months is when we deliver it. And so with that, we're able to work with the client through all of their different situations. So, hey, I have a goal of retiring at this age. This is what I have right now saved. Do I have enough? Right?
Yeah.
So a lot
essentially what you did with your mom, but for clients. Right?
Exactly. So a lot of the times they may have a 401k only, and so we can't manage the assets while they're still employed. And so in that case, they become a financial planning client where we just do the financial planning. So we have an amazing software that we use and that clients keep access to afterwards. And so they have the ability to run a bunch of what if scenarios afterwards. But when we meet, we have multiple different meetings, 2-hour sessions each time. And then we do a bunch of what if scenarios. So if it's a couple, then I always do the what if one passes away early. Right? Now, what happens? Is it going to completely destroy the plan? And if so, then what can we do to offset that risk? And that's where we look at the life insurances they can get, et cetera, et cetera. But the financial planning also allows them maybe to plan for kids' college, or just, hey, I want to be able to go on a trip every single year. So then how can I make that happen? So let's us run what if scenarios, and it shows you the impact of your decisions for the rest of your life based off of what you make today. So if I make these decisions today, then how is this decision going to impact the rest of my life? So we've run scenarios of people moving from Florida to California. So what's that going to do? Because financially, that's going to increase their taxes, but it can also increase their income. And then we look at, okay, what's your overall net worth going to be at the end of all of this? And in which scenario do you prefer? So we also look at what their expenses are expected to be, their income sources. We plug it all in, we add their pension, we add their Social Security. Then we say, okay, based off of your needs, this is what you have got to do today to be able to reach that goal. And then the last service is the financial coaching, which is where we just do an hourly based service. And so just whatever needs that they have, we just cover it all throughout the hour. The hourly coaching is $150 an hour. The financial planning cost, that ranges, but it starts at around $1,000, then it goes up to around $2,500 based off of the situation. But all the prices are online. So just yourfinanciallegacy.com, then you can go under the services and everything is super transparent. And then on the website, up on the top right, there is a book a consultation. So if anyone has any questions, they can either schedule a free 15-minute phone call or a free 60-minute consultation, either in person or on Zoom. So we definitely do Zoom a lot as well. Just a lot of clients who are out of state. We can help you. We can diagnose where you are right now, and then we can give you the steps to go forward, and then you can decide whether you want to become a client or not.
Love it. Providing hope for your business.
That's right.
Gosh, this has been so great. And I appreciate you listeners for sticking with us. I know this is a little longer than my typical episodes, but this is so important. And we've covered a lot of ground today. And again, it's kind of interesting because I was experiencing financial heartbreak on top of some other relationship heartbreaks, on top of some other things happening. And so just having that hope that there is light at the end of the tunnel and that the Lord will provide if you truly believe that He will provide. He will provide. Amen. You just have to believe that. and then do your part to stay in the Word and speak to Him about it and make sure that you have that relationship with Him so He can guide you through it.
Yeah, Jesus talked more about money than heaven and hell combined. So it is very important to Jesus. And ultimately, because it's all about the heart. And a lot of times, the money has to do with our hearts.
Oh, the money is directly tied to our hearts.
Absolutely.
Where our hearts are, our money follows.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Tryssa Pacciulli, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you for your expertise. And again, listeners, yourfinanciallegacy.com is the place to go to get some help with your financial situation. And gosh, thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So thank you again for joining us for today's episode of Breaking Up with Naive. It's not a heartbreak, it's a rebrand. Thank you for joining us on today's episode of Breaking Up with Naive. It's not a heartbreak, it's a rebrand.